Of announcements. One is we are hopefully going to have a single service this Sunday. So we're going to try it. It is Father's Day, so we'll send a phone invite out and stuff. So just assume for right now we're going to have a single service this upcoming Sunday. Some of the changes that we're going to make is we're going to do every other pew on these on the outside, and then every third. So basically this will stay the same here in the middle. So we had about 55 Sunday morning. Our fire marshal capacity is 300. So by the governor and CDC regulations, we'll be fine. But really our seating capacity is what matters, not just how many people can stand, together like sardines. But we could probably do about 200, give or take. So I think that if we do it that way, we could do one service. So we'll see how that goes. Also, for those who you may remember, we did a time of prayer on Mondays. We were doing it at 2 p.m. I'd like for us next Monday to start that back up again. So if you are interested in that, some of us are fasting until the time of prayer. Which is awesome because you get happy hour at Arby's whenever you're doing prayer. So get those sliders for $1, get your drink for $1, man. You can rack up the calories and for like $3. It's pretty awesome. So, but next Monday, Lord willing, 2:00, we'll be here for a time of prayer, and we'll do it just like we were before. Okay. I think that's virtually everything. So let's go ahead and open our Bibles to Genesis chapter 4. We have spent, I think this is our third week looking at the story of Cain and Abel. At this point, time is moving so strange to me. Maybe it isn't to you. These last 3 months have been like the longest 3 years of my life. So I can't remember if this is our third or fourth week in Genesis 4, the Cain and Abel story. I think it's our third. My goal is for us to finish this story today. If not, we'll finish it next week. And then after, the next thing in Genesis is genealogies, and I am so excited about that, as I know you are. So I want to make sure we get to that as soon as we can. Well, this is what we've seen. Now you may have to click the button. All right. It was off and hit on, and I probably did something wrong. But what we've seen so far in the story of Cain and Abel is the first sacrifices, how improper worship inevitably leads to, here we go, the first son's first sacrifice, improper worship, we see more actions, and then the first murder. And that's where we left off. So Cain has killed Abel. So let's read verses 8 to 16, and hopefully we can cover 8 verses, which would be quite a feat for us. Cain spoke to Abel his brother, and when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is Abel your brother?" He said, "I do not know. Am I my brother's keeper?" And the Lord said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground, and now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you work the ground, it will no longer yield to you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth." Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is greater than I can bear. Behold, you have driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. Whoever finds me will kill me." And the Lord said to him, "Not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold." And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest any who found him should attack him. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. Well, we saw the murder of Abel last time. So starting in verse 9, we want to see the response from Cain and from the Lord. So you may recall that in this scene, God speaks first. So just like in the Garden of Eden, where upon the eating of the fruit, man's rebellion, God responds by coming down to man. That is a gospel narrative that we see ultimately in Christ, isn't it? That amid man's sin, man doesn't and isn't naturally inclined to turn to God. God must then come down to man. It's the same pattern we see there. So God is the one that speaks first. And he says, where is your brother? What have you done? It isn't because God is ignorant, but that gives Cain an opportunity to confess. And we've seen how bad humanity is at this confession thing, right? Adam and Eve, what was their confession? It's their fault, right? They're just like toddlers, right? I didn't do it. They made me do it. Cain essentially does the same thing here. Notice his answer in verse 9 is simply that he doesn't know where Abel is. Now that is what we call in the business a lie. He knows where Abel is. He killed him. He's out in the field. Now, that is quite a bit different from Adam and Eve. Adam and Eve blame shifted when confronted in sin. Cain lies when confronted with his sin. In fact, there's irony here, isn't it? Cain's answer is, I don't know. Now, if you've been following in Genesis, that word know should leap off the page, shouldn't it? That's the whole reason they ate the fruit in the garden. The promise was the second you eat of this fruit, you will know. It's the fruit of the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And in knowing good and evil, you will be like God. Remember, God isn't saying you perpetually will not be allowed to eat of this fruit. You're not ready to eat of this fruit. Or you're not ready for all that God knows. God is discipling Adam and Eve. But they skipped that and took for themselves knowledge. And that's why Genesis 3 and 4 is really helpful when we think about what the Bible teaches about wisdom and knowledge and discernment. And so they ate the fruit in order to know. Cain responds with, I don't know. Right? For all the knowledge they've gained about good and evil, or good and bad really is a better term, we see how ignorant man is. So much for eating that. And so Cain says, not only do I not know where Abel is, but then he responds like a teenager and says, am I my brother's keeper? Now, this has become a proverbial statement in our culture now, and rightly so. It's easy to apply in different circumstances. But it basically means he is not my responsibility. Right? That's basically what he's saying. It's how the proverb works today. If any of you all remember, many, many years ago, when President Barack Obama was president, he would use that phrase in his defense of Big Brother, right? You remember he would say this? He would say, I am my brother's keeper. Therefore, we need to raise taxes and increase the social safety net. You all remember any of this? It drove me crazy. Because whatever you think of liberal policies, President Obama, that's not the issue. Because the narrative is, am I my brother's keeper? Cain says no, right? But this was used in the positive. And that's all fine and dandy. But every time he said it, I thought, does he know the context of that? It's in the context of murder, right? And I know that's not what he meant by it, but it's just, this has always struck me as all the way to defend liberal government policies and government intervention. But in the original context, it's more than just getting out of responsibility. It's an insult. Cain responds to God with defiance. I don't know where he is. He's not my problem, God. Right? Leave me alone. It's an act of defiance. So instead of fearing God, he questions God. Who do you think you are asking me about where my brother is? He's a big boy. He can take care of himself. Now, that word brother is an interesting word. It shows up all over in this story of Cain and Abel. By my count, it shows up about 6 times in about 5 verses. I want to show them to you all at once. One of the things you'll notice here is that brother is always attached to Abel and never to Cain. So she bore his brother Abel. Cain spoke to Abel, his brother. Where is Abel, your brother? The Lord said, the voice of your brother's blood. And now you are cursed from the ground, which was opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood. I think there's a couple of reasons for this. One of the more obvious ones is to emphasize the depravity of the act of fratricide, right? The murder of your own brother. It isn't just that he committed murder. He committed murder against his own relative. Now, in the ancient Near East history, in that culture, that was a particularly heinous crime. Right? So blood relatives, remember, you're in ancient Near Eastern culture, very tribalism is what drives everything, right? So what matters isn't the state or the nation you're under, it's the tribe you're from, right? It's your family. So the thought of killing someone in your own tribe, someone like your brother, was unthinkable at this time, right? Many of you all know my favorite book of all time. I've probably read it a dozen times. Is none other than Beowulf. So it's about a bunch of Vikings who fight monsters and try to find themselves through the process. But what Beowulf is about a guy named Beowulf. But what's interesting about Beowulf is if you look under the surface, other than just dragon slaying and monster slaying, which is just awesome, it's really it's looking at humanity through the lens of Cain and Abel. So what you find is that the first monster in Beowulf is a descendant of Cain. The whole point of the book is to say that if Grendel and Grendel's mother are descendants of Cain, Grendel's literally the son of Cain, then what does that say about humanity? Who is humanity in the story? Well, they're sons of Seth, right? But who are Cain and Seth? They're sons of Adam. That's the whole point of Beowulf. It is to highlight the circular depravity of humanity. What did Cain do? Cain killed his brother. Well, guess what Grendel comes in to do? Grendel comes into to the mead hall, Hrothgar's mead hall, and he kills everybody. Who are these people? Now, Grendel's technically a monster. These are technically his brothers, right, in terms of humanity. What does and whenever you meet all the characters in Beowulf, what do we find out? They've all killed people, and particularly their own brothers. And so what the authors are doing, we think monks played a role in editing the story of Beowulf, is they're trying to take the story of Cain and Abel and apply it to humanity. At the core of humanity, particularly in Viking culture, and this was written, is murder. So you have the king gives out gold to Beowulf when he kills his monster that's attacking his home. He gives him gold. Well, where did the king get that gold? He stole it by killing people in the next tribe. They're Vikings. That's what Vikings do. Well, the story ends with Beowulf slaying a dragon. Where did the dragon get that gold? He stole it. Like a Viking, right? That's the whole point of the story. So it takes it from here. So this idea of brothers is a big theme here. That Cain was so depraved that he would kill someone of his own tribe, his very flesh and blood. We'll go down to verse 10. It says, the Lord said, "What have you done? The voice of your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground." Now, compare this to chapter 3, verse 13. You'll find the same language there. It says, "Then the Lord God said to the woman, 'What is this that you have done?'" That is a literary device to say that what you saw happen in the garden is now happening in the field. This is the result of the fall. Sin has entered into the world, and now mankind knows what death is. Mankind knows what violence is. And now with a depraved heart, he takes this knowledge and uses it for evil. You want to know what the greatest tool for technological advancement in human history? War. The genesis of the internet comes from two places. One, obviously, Al Gore. I mean, we all know that. But really, it comes from World War II. It was a device for bombing the enemy that the Americans came up with. War is a great way to fuel technological advances because you're trying to kill as many people as you can before they kill you. Well, once you gain that knowledge, think about it. We have nuclear power now. Where did nuclear, if you're President Bush, where did that come from? It came from our desire to wipe an entire city off the map, right? So what is it that you have done? He is clearly a son of Adam, and he is guilty of sin, and God asked him the same question. And then we get this judgment upon Cain. The voice of your brother's blood cries out to me from the ground. Now this has become a way of speaking proverbially about justice, right? That the voice of the deceased that has been murdered, the blood cries out from the ground. Now, that's metaphorical language. It's not literal, and the ancients understood that, but it's proverbial. that the cry for justice is a natural cry from the earth even, right? That when blood is shed, we understand that justice must be done. Now, this isn't the only time or the only place in the Bible where the voice of the dead cries for justice. And one other example I found in the Bible is actually Revelation chapter 6. You remember the story? This is where the blood of the martyrs cries out to God, right? They're dead. But we see them, deceased, crying out for justice. How long will it be before you avenge our blood? It's very similar to this story of Abel, isn't it? And the issue is that of justice. Is God not a God of justice? Now, is that issue an issue that we're talking about right now in our culture? Yeah, I mean, the whole reason we're protested in the streets is because we want justice. But perhaps you've noticed that when a society turns its back on God, their idea of justice is very different from a biblical idea. Justice now looks like vengeance. Have you noticed that? It looks like vengeance. And really, we could take it farther. It looks like malice. What does burning a CVS pharmacy in an inner city have to do with police brutality? Nothing. By the way, every right's like this, whether we're writing police brutality, racism, or sexual liberty, right? You can look at these as not the Stonewall riots. That makes me a racist. What was that in the 60s? Stone something. Well, you're all a bunch of homophobes, clearly, right? Okay, well, stone something. It's not Stonewall. I can't imagine they would use that name because, that was a Confederate general. But anyways, but what you have is violence involved with that. That movements come as a result of violence. But the Bible shows, and we'll see that here in the story of Cain if we can get to it, that violence begets more violence. How did Jesus summarize that? Put away your sword, Peter. Why? Those who live by the sword will die by the sword. This is the story of Beowulf, right? Okay, Mr. Viking, you're going to go kill, pillage, and steal. Guess what's going to happen to you now? You've got all the gold. Someone wants your gold. Guess what they're going to do? They're going to come kill, steal, and pillage. Well, then how are you going to respond? You want their gold. You're going to go kill, steal, and pillage, right? Those who live by the sword die by the sword. I read a history of the Hatfield McCoy's feud. It was just a fascinating story. It's amazing what people will do over a pig. But what you find is the way I summarize that story is those who live by the Winchester die by the Winchester, right? I mean, that's all it is you killed my loved one, now I got to kill one of your loved ones. Well, now that you killed one of my loved ones, I got to kill two of your loved ones. Well, now you killed two of my loved ones, we're going to attack you in the middle of the night and kill your family. Well, now that you killed my family, I got to kill your family, right? Right? I mean, it's just back, and it doesn't stop. Just doesn't stop. Well, guess what we're having in our culture the last, easily decade? Considering some of the riots we had in the Obama administration. You see how it's gotten worse? Every riot, every protest. Why? Because we're not talking about justice, we're talking about vengeance, motivated by malice. Now, some of what may fuel it initially may be just. Whatever you think about police brutality or racism or whatever it is, some of that may be just. Whatever you may think about reopening the economy, for example, right? Maybe that's what you're protesting. But it doesn't take long in a post-Christian society for a cry for justice becomes a cry for vengeance. And so now we will, burn down a Wendy's that had nothing to do with the shooting. By the way, it's a white girl who did that because she's liberated. Anyways, I'm in enough trouble. So God does care about justice. One of the things I want you to see here is that you will not find the term social justice in the Bible. You'll find the term justice, and I believe there's a clear distinction there. But that will probably get me in trouble. But let's just look at a few examples of God's cry for justice. For I have chosen him that he may command his children and his households after him to keep the way of the Lord by doing righteousness and justice, so that the Lord may bring to Abraham what he's promised him. This is God's promise to Abraham. God chose Abraham so that out of the people of Israel, what will happen on the earth? Justice will rain down. So justice is a very serious matter, not just for God, but for God's people. Deuteronomy chapter 10, he executes justice for the fatherless and the widow and loves the sojourner, giving them food and clothing. So where you find a Christian society, what is it that you find? You find sensitivity to those who are handicapped, impoverished, or orphaned widows, all of that. This has always been a Christian idea. Now, what that looks like, we can disagree with, right? Should everything be privatized with private charities, churches, and whatnot? Or should the state get involved? I don't know the answer to that. All right? But clearly the Bible says that there are those who are disenfranchised. There are those who are victimized just by life itself. They've lost the primary breadwinner. They've had bad things happen to them that keeps them from really being able to do the things that God would otherwise expect from us. What is society's role? What is your role in that? And that is justice. Deuteronomy 16. You shall not pervert justice. You shall not show partiality. You shall not accept a bribe, for a bribe blinds the eyes of the wise and subverts the cause of the righteous. Justice and only justice you shall follow, that you may live and inherit the land the Lord your God has given you. I mean, if you don't get the point, is we are to live justly. And one of the ways to avoid that is bribery and corruption within the system. Now, it is my personal opinion, which is probably wrong, that if you want to limit corruption and bribery and all that in the system, you have to limit the system. The more power and influence you give the system, the more corruption there will be to that system. Because if that's where the money is, if that's where the power is, people will corrupt it in order to get the money and the power. But then again, I'm borderline libertarian. Okay, so I'm very much. In fact, I think that was the idea of the founding fathers. The founding fathers understood that democracy and monarchy are essentially the same thing. Because the issue is who holds all the power. In a monarchy, you have corruption in a single person and his administration. In a democracy, you have corruption and power among the people. And guess what happens? Whenever you realize that you can vote to get money from the government or from other people, guess what you're going to vote for? I'm borderline libertarian, but I love the money I got from the CARES Act, didn't you? I might vote for that again. That was kind of nice. You know, got to pay off, not pay off, but pay down a student loan with that. Yeah, that was nice. I may do that again. You know, let's have a vote on it. So before long, those who are on the outside get victimized by democracy, and you can corrupt the system. What the founding fathers did was they said, if the problem is power, we've got to eliminate power. So what you get is a convoluted, difficult process in government itself, where the judicial tells the legislative and executive no, and the legislative and the executive both tell each other no. So nothing gets done. That's the point. So it isn't that the people have power in the American system, and it's not that the government should have power in the American system. The goal was essentially to eliminate as much power as possible. I think that's brilliant. But what we've done now is we've surrendered all of that. And now who has all the power is government and big tech. And we won't be long before you will not be able to find East Frankfort Baptist Church on Google or on Facebook or on the Twitter. In fact, we almost signed up for something through Google. I can't remember what it was. And when it came down to signing their discrimination clause, we couldn't. Because this church cannot at this point, unless y'all just become uber liberal, we cannot hire a homosexual. And considering what the Supreme Court just said, that will ruin us soon. We'll be shut because of it. All right? So we just can't do that with Google right now. So you got big tech, you got big brother. Which if you were to take 1984, the book, with Brave New World, and merge them together, what you have is 21st century modern America. Anyways, I've rambled. Deuteronomy 27, cursed be anyone who perverts justice due to the sojourner, the fatherless, the widow, and all the people said amen. All right. Well, gosh, why? I'm trying to stay out of trouble. The rock, ultimately speaking of Jesus, his work is perfect, for all his ways are justice, a God of faithfulness and without iniquity, just and upright to see. Why are there so many references to justice in Deuteronomy? It's the last sermon of Moses as they enter the promised land. What does Moses want them to grasp? The people of God are to be a just people. Psalm 9:7, the Lord sits enthroned forever. He has established his throne for justice. Psalm 37, for the Lord loves justice. He will not forsake his saints. They are preserved forever. The children of the wicked shall be cut off. By the way, notice the cutting off the wicked is an act of justice. Isaiah 1, learn to do good, seek justice, correct oppression, bring justice to the fatherless, plead the widow's cause. Amos 5:15, hate evil, love good, and establish justice in the gate. It may be the Lord, the God of hosts, will be gracious to the remnant of Joseph. Amos is a big book when it comes to the issue of justice. Martin Luther King Jr. Quoted from it all the time. You could read the I Have a Dream speech. He reads from it there most famously. Micah 6:8, he has told you, O man, what is good. What does the Lord require of you? To do justice, love kindness, to walk humbly before your God. By the way, let me just add this to you liberals here who only read half of that. You can't do justice unless you're walking humbly before your God. Read the whole verse. All right, sorry. I just see a bunch of libs like, fee, so that's right there. Yeah, so is humbly walk before your God, you pagan. But Matthew 23, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites! You tithe mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. These you ought to have done without neglecting the others. And let me retranslate this. At some point, I'm going to ask a bunch of liberals, how faithful have they been in paying their tithe to Planned Parenthood, right? Right? I mean, it's a religion. And so Jesus is saying here is that you make such a big deal out of virtue signaling, which is nothing more than self-righteous religion, that you forget the more important things, like don't burn down innocent people's properties. Don't kill people because you're angry. What do I know? I'm a straight white Christian male. So you should ignore me, right? So God clearly, the whole point of this is that God clearly cares about justice. The blood of the innocent cries out to him. And so to ignore what the Bible teaches about justice is to ignore much of what the Bible actually has to say. That is where we get the idea of justification. Justice involves saving the weak and judging the wicked. And justice, we see in the Bible, begins in the heart of man. It involves confession, forgiveness, and reconciliation. It then moves to issues like self-control, love, mercy, equity, and judgment upon the wicked. Now, our society thinks that justice is only judgments, right? So if you have a tweet from 20 years ago, which Twitter went around then, but they'll find it, then justice becomes judgments. But in the Bible, justice isn't just judgment. Justice is also mercy, kindness, patience, reconciliation, equity, self-control. Is there a dirtier word in our culture right now than self-control? You know, I understand you think police brutality is bad, but do you think you could hold off on, burning down an entire city? Do you think we could hold back on that? Be angry. Don't forget the part about not sinning part, right? But self-control isn't allowed anymore. Justice never comes by vengeance, unchecked wrath, or personal vendettas. Hate never leads to justice. And our society, because it's tribal, is driven by hate. So here's my tribe. We're all a bunch of Second Amendment gun-toting conservatives, right? Well, we hate those who are on the other side, whatever that other side may look like. You can do your stereotype. And to weaponize justice in the name of justice isn't justice, is it? Justice for so-and-so. Let's tear the city down. That's not justice. It's not justice at all. And by the way, this is why we need the cross, isn't it? At the cross, you'll find the justice of God and the mercy of God right there. And Christianity's understanding of justice must always involve both. You have to have both justice and grace. And left to himself, man is always going to choose violence over atonement. We must move on. Verse 11, and now you are cursed from the ground which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. The word cursed isn't a new word, right? Genesis 3:14, God cursed the serpent. Genesis 3:17, God cursed Adam, or the earth really was what he's cursing there. In Genesis 4, now we see the son of Adam being cursed. Right? Judgment leads to the judgment of God. So we see that Cain is not only a son of Adam, thus inheriting original sin, but we also see here he is a son of the serpent. Go back to Genesis 3:15. The promise is that the seed of the serpent will bruise the heel of the seed of the woman. And you remember, Eve thought Cain was her seed. He is the Savior who will crush the head of the serpent. But what we have found, and in this cursing, is actually he is the spiritual seed of the serpents. And so what we're left with is, where's the seed of the woman? Well, if it were Abel, he's dead. So it looks like the serpent is winning the battle. But what's really happening is the serpent has only struck the heel. And this is why in the verses that follow, we'll see the birth of Seth. And the language used there is purposely picking up on Genesis 3:15. Well, verse 12, when you work the ground, it shall no longer yield to you its strength. You shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. Now remember, Cain was already working the ground. So he was a farmer. His brother was a shepherd. And so he's already working the ground, but now God has cursed the ground for him. He's already cursed the ground, but now he's cursed the ground in regards to Cain's working of it. And this means that Cain will perpetually wander, work, and till the ground, but he is going to struggle to survive. So he's referred to here as a fugitive. And so like Adam and Eve, Cain is expelled. So Adam and Eve just go just outside the garden. Cain is going to have to go farther outside the garden. One commentator described it as the temple, right? So if the Garden of Eden is the Holy of Holies, Adam and Eve go outside of the Holy of Holies, let's say into the where the Jewish men can go. Where Cain is going is perhaps even in the court of Gentiles, or even outside of it entirely. He's getting farther away from the presence of God, and he's going to wander the earth and never find a home. And because of that, he's never going to find rest. I believe Cain is unrepentant. Not everyone agrees with me, but that's the majority view. Mark Driscoll is the one who thinks that Cain repented. So you boys do with that whatever you want. Tell that to Lane. But he's not the only one, but he's the one I've come across to say that. So we see that Cain is unrepentant, and as a result, he never finds rest for his soul. It's clearly a theological connection there. Here's a question I have in Cain's judgment. He's going to be a wanderer, a fugitive. Is there similarity, a parallel, not a perfect parallel, a parallel between Cain here and Abraham later? Abraham isn't a fugitive in that he's committed a crime and now he's on the run from the man. That's Cain. Abraham, the term is sojourner, right? Remember, Abraham is given a land he never possesses. So he wanders the promised land, but he never finally rests. Now the difference is that one is a fugitive and under the judgment of God. The other is told to wait for the unfolding of God's plan, right? I just find that there's some interesting parallels there. I don't know what else to do with that. Okay, verse 13. I think we may be able to do this if we keep moving. Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is greater than I can bear." That word punishment is an interesting word. It is the word iniquity. In fact, the next time it's used, this is the first time it's used in the Old Testament. The second time it's used in Genesis 15, where it says, "And they shall come back here to the fourth generation, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete." It's the same word. Now, how in the world does iniquity have anything to do with punishment? Etymologically. One commentator says that in Hebrew thought, both go together. Iniquity results in punishment. You really think about it, there's something profound there. What have we done in our society? We've ultimately denied iniquity, therefore we deny punishment. Or we'll say, we can have the iniquity, we don't have to have the punishments. Isn't this the problem with birth control and abortion? Just to give you the first example off the top of my head. You can have the iniquity without the responsibility. That may be a better way of putting it. I think I have a chapter of that in my first book where we talk about it, that abortion has become a form of birth control. That if the other stuff didn't work out, don't worry, you don't have to have any responsibility for your actions. We've separated those two quite easily in our culture. You can have one without the other. In fact, we've done that with the family, isn't it? You can destroy the family, and don't worry, there won't be any consequences of that. Well, that's just patently false. So whenever we told dads, you're not needed, society began to crumble before our very eyes. Within, 2-3 generations we've seen this? Right? So, because we believe you can have the iniquity without the punishment or without the results. That's not the case in Jewish thought, and I think they are right there. And so he complains his punishment's too great. Verse 14, behold, you have driven me today away from the ground, and from your face I shall be hidden. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth. Whoever finds me will kill me. Now what Cain is fearing here is the fruit of alienation. Alienation leads to the fear of others, right? So if you feel like you're on the outside, not only does that stir up jealousy, but a sense of fear. And Cain says that if you expel me, you've alienated me from everyone I know, and they're going to seek vengeance upon me. That is his real fear, is that people will do to me what I've done to Abel. All right? Now, it's not justice. You don't just kill someone just because. But he fears, in his corrupted sense of justice, that someone is going to kill me because I killed them. Now, you think about how rich that is. Cain just said, God, it's not right that my life is taken from me, even though I just took the life of someone innocent. Why is Cain the exception of the rule here? I mean, I don't think he's repented at all. I just, the way he talks to God, for one. But he's not in a place to make commands. But he clearly understands that his violence will beget violence. And so what God does is he promises to protect Cain. Verse 15. The Lord said to him, not so. If anyone kills Cain, vengeance shall be taken on him sevenfold. And the Lord put a mark on Cain, lest any who found him should attack him. Now think about this. Cain fears alienation and vengeance. God responds with protection. That doesn't seem right, does it? Does that bother you a little bit? If not, I have to start talking like a liberal, right? You don't believe in death. They don't believe in it. We're gonna have to burn the sanctuary. Think about it. It doesn't sound right, does it? God responds to a murderer by protecting him. I don't think I'd ever noticed that before. I don't think I ever noticed it. But remember the context of what it is we have here. Hopefully you've seen the parallels between the story of Cain and Abel and the story of the garden. So we see that God responds the same way. He speaks first. He comes down. What is it that you have done? He says at both places. There's clearly parallels. Cain is the son of Adam and a son of Eve, right? So we see the parallels. What did God do for Adam and Eve? He came down and he made a sacrifice on their behalf. A substitute was offered. And you read that. And God said, the minute you eat of the tree, there will be death. And there was, wasn't there? It should have been their death, but it ended up being the death of someone innocent. So God does something that is unthinkable on behalf of those who don't deserve it. What is he doing here? He's doing the unthinkable on behalf of someone who doesn't deserve it. What do we call that? We call it grace. Did Adam and Eve deserve to be covered in the righteous blood of the innocent animal? No. God provided it nonetheless. Does Cain deserve protection from vengeance? No. But he gives it anyways. It's incredible, isn't it? We only think of Cain as a bad dude who deserves, to be locked up and thrown away the key. And he does. But God in his grace gives Cain longevity and a family out of that. But he is still under the judgment of God. Does this help us understand what Paul means in the Old Testament? Because Paul's quoting the Old Testament. I believe it's Isaiah or the Psalms. When Paul says, don't seek vengeance. For the Lord says, vengeance is mine. I will repay. Isn't that what God is doing here? God isn't saying, you know what? No big deal. I hear Abel crying out to me. Don't worry about it. He's not. Because he didn't do that to Adam and Eve. Do Adam and Eve die? Yeah, that was the promise. That was the judgment. Is Cain going to suffer the consequences of his actions? Yeah. He's been alienated. He's been expelled. He's going to be a fugitive. And he is going to die. His blood is going to be shed. But on God's timing. So in this story, we see the mystery of grace and judgment. It's justice. Justice has to have a hint of grace in it, doesn't it? Otherwise, it's vengeance. This is why the American system is the people carry out justice, not the police, and not the wounded family, the victims. So if you were to hurt someone I love, I can't go hurt you. But the people of Frankfort can, right? This is why when you're on trial, it's the people versus Bob. Right? Well, because we take vengeance out and make it justice. And I think it's a pretty good system. The police arrest, they do not try. Now, there'll be eyewitnesses and stuff. That's why you have attorney generals and prosecutors and stuff like that. They actually prosecute. The police don't prosecute. But anyways, that's neither here nor there. Here's the last question we have, and then maybe we can leave. What is the mark of Cain? I'm talking to all white people, so I'm interested in seeing what you're going to say about this. Is that too soon? What is the mark of Cain? What do you think? Come on. Well, clearly, it has to do with chattel slavery, right? Can I prove it to you? Well, you have a mark on Cain. Turn over to chapter 9. I didn't write down this reference, but let's see. I think I can find it pretty quickly. Yeah, chapter 9, verse 25. Let's do verse 24 and make sure you get the context there. When Noah awoke from his wine and knew what his youngest son had done to him, this is Ham, right? He said, "Cursed be Canaan, a servant of servants shall be to his brothers." Who are the Canaanites? They're dark skinned, aren't they? What's the curse? Not that Ham will be a slave, but his descendants will be. Right? So see, I think African slavery is okay. Boy, that's going to be taken out of context. Someone, don't tell Lane I said that. Because he will put that in a video. Yeah, that would be just as bad. He'll gif it, whatever the cool kids say these days. Right, do you see it? I'm just reading the Bible. Just reading the Bible. After all, we read the New Testament. We've been doing our daily devotions. Yesterday today we looked at Ephesians 6, and Paul clearly isn't against slavery. He tells slaves what to do. You got to obey your masters. I'm just reading the Bible, y'all. Just reading the Bible. Am I right? Please say no, right? Please say no. For those who may be at home and just now woke up and heard me say that this supports African slavery, no, it does not. But that was one of the primary theological defenses of those who defended chattel slavery in the South and in the North. There are racists in the North. Don't believe everything you read. There are racists in the North and on the coast, right? Even in Chaz, there are racists, okay? Racism is not a white person problem. It is a human problem, okay? This is, throughout history, there's been racists. But particularly in the South, of where slavery was legal, this is one of the arguments they made. See, the curse of Cain, the mark of Cain, leads to the cursing of Canaan, and then somehow, even though Canaan is in the Fertile Crescent, not Africa, but you skip that detail, right? So you got it right there. Right? It doesn't work. It's bad theology. Let me give you a few reasons why it's bad theology. Notice the mark is on Cain, not his descendants. And the purpose of the mark is yes, judgment. After all, the mark shows people and reminds people what he has done. He's an unrepentant murderer, fratricide. It is also an act of grace, protection. But it's only for Cain, not for his descendants. Furthermore, there is no real biological connection outside of being son of Adam between Cain and Ham. Ham is a descendant of Seth because Noah is a descendant of Seth. All the Cainites, if you will, were wiped out in the flood. Now, what you have in the story of Ham is a retelling of the story of Cain and Abel. In that Shem and Japheth are like Abel and Seth, and Ham is like Cain. It is their descendants that are now cursed. All right. Much in the same way that Cain's descendants become increasingly evil. We'll see with, I think it's Lamech later on in the chapter. So we're to see parallels that way, but biologically it doesn't work at all. So there's a real problem with that sort of mentality. By the way, for those of you who find Mormonism just strangely fascinating, because I am certainly one of those, this was their argument. In fact, if I really wanted to get in trouble, I would read to you from the Pearl of Great Price and the Book of Mormon itself. It is a historical theology of Mormonism, and I've read it to you before, that there was a big battle between the Lamanites and the Nephites. You don't have to remember that. It won't be on the quiz. And they fought, and the bad guys won. Bad guys won, which is a terrible way to end the story. So what God does is, because they're bad guys, is God curses them with dark skin. And it was Joseph Smith who believed that the Native Americans were among the lost tribes of Israel. And Joseph Smith took, you read in the Book of Abraham, which is a funny story in of itself. It's a fraudulent story, like literally. And there you see the curse of Ham laid out in defense of those who have dark skin are therefore still under the curse of God. This is Mormon theology. That's why it wasn't until the 1960s that an African American could serve as a priest in the Mormon church. There's no way of getting around this. You can't. It was a racist ideology. Joseph Smith was a racist. But he grew up in a culture that believed all of this sort of stuff. Not to mention he stole a lot of copyrighted stuff for the Book of Mormon. That's neither here nor there. So what is the mark of Cain? This just so we can go. A couple of things to note. First of all, the Hebrew word used here for mark is used about 79 times in the Old Testament and is almost always translated not as mark, but as sign. Let me give you a few examples where God gives someone a sign or a mark. Judges chapter 6, verse 30 to 36, or really even beyond that. It's a story of Gideon laying out the fleece. Verse 17 uses this word, sign or mark, say, God, this will be a sign that you want me to go and declare war. In 2 Kings chapter 2, remember the story, Elijah's about to ascend into heaven in a chariot of fire. If you remember, what is it that Elisha wants? He wants a double portion of Elijah, right? He wants double stuffed Elijah, Oreos. And so remember what Elijah says. The sign is, if you watch me ascend, you'll get it. And that's exactly what happened, right? It's a sign from God. In Ezekiel chapter 9, God marks the people of God. Go through the midst of the city, through the midst of Jerusalem, put a mark on the foreheads of men who sigh and cry over the abominations that are down with them. Revelation chapter 7, we see the people of God being marked and thus preserved, right? That is contrasted with another mark. What is it called in Revelation? Mark of something. Mark? What? Mark of the beast. Man, yeah. The mark of President Obama is what it's called, right? And or Trump. I don't know what party you are. It's they're all evil at this point. And so you have these marks, right? And so there's precedent for it. Now, what it is precisely, the options abound. And whenever you discover in the Bible there's a lot of options to someone's question, it's because the Bible isn't clear. So don't make a conclusion that the Bible doesn't make. So here's some of your options. One, chattel slavery. I mean, let's be honest. You've got to make a huge jump to go from this story to chattel slavery, because God is speaking to a murderer. So now is a defense of slavery. Both are evil. Don't use evil to defend your evil, right? It just, anyways. Murder's wrong. But abortion's awesome. Right? That's what we do now, isn't it? Anyways. But one popular option in Jewish tradition was it's leprosy. I don't know how that works, but you get there. My favorite option was God put a horn on his head. So if you ever view a lot of Renaissance painting, medieval paintings, you'll see this. Cain has a horn coming out of his head. That was the mark. And there's reasons for that. They do the same thing to Moses. There's a famous statue of Moses who he has, like he's a fawn or something. He's got these two little horns right out of his head. But that's because of the King James Bible. But we won't do that story. ultimately, as we said, the mark is for protection and shame. We don't know precisely what it looks like, and it may not have been a physical sign. You can Google Mark of Cain, because I did that today, and what you get is a bunch of pictures of people with tattoos. They took Proto-Hebrew, and I'm not sure, they took one of the letters, and I'm not sure which letter it is. Some say it was one of the letters in the names of God, Yahweh, and anyways. And so people get a tattoo of the Mark of Cain. Look, of all the tattoos you should get, that probably shouldn't be it. Right? I mean, it's you might as well get the symbol of Planned Parenthood on your forehead while you're at it, right? You know, I mean, it is like people who have like Nazi symbols around the place. Like, you should stay away from them, right? You know what I like? I like people who kill people. I don't want you to know about it, right? You should stay away from them. Like, get on a different message board. I don't know if those are still around. One last thing, verse, I believe 16. I got 15 in my notes. I think it's verse 16. Then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. This is the only time you'll see Nod in the Bible. So don't read into it. The word Nod means wandering. You could even translate it as homeless. So Cain, I assume Cain is the one that names it. And what is he saying? He is settled. You remember, he's a fugitive. But he settles in a place that means unsettled. It means homeless. His home is a place called homeless. It's almost like a sign from God. It's almost like a mark. A perpetual reminder that he is farther away. So remember, we did this in Genesis 3, that the entrance into the garden was on the east side, that parallels with the tabernacle and the temple, and the future temple, Ezekiel. So Adam and Eve go east of the temple. Now where is Cain going? He's going east of his family, and he's landing in a place called Nod. So what is it that we're seeing? In the book of Genesis, when you go east, and we talked about it quite a bit in Genesis 3, when you go east, you're getting farther away from God. And the farther away you get from God, what do you find? Restlessness, homelessness, a wandering. Turn on your news and you tell me if we're still doing that today. The farther you get away from God, the more restless we become. And we start burning cities down. We're declaring independence so that we can plant a garden on top of concrete. Right? We just get lost. And we don't respond by turning around. That would be repentance. We respond by keep going east. And where's the story going? To a place where a group of people met in the east called Babel. And there God has to disperse them all over the world where they're farther away from God. And it's out of that story, what do we get? A man named Abraham, and where does he go? West. All right, any questions I can dodge? Well, good deal. Well, now that I have set myself up to be in a lot of trouble because this is recorded, why don't we stand up and be concluded and pray. Just a reminder, Lord willing, Sunday we'll do one service for the sake of the music team not having to hear me twice. Another thing I failed to forget. Don, I blame you that you didn't remind me. We're going to have 2 Sunday school classes Sunday. So you can choose between putting up with Danny for an hour and learning and continue to study the book of Hebrews and the glory that is Christ, or you can join Don in the fellowship hall where we are going to study the book of Jeremiah. You choose. All right? And if hopefully we can keep adding classes as we go, but we're going to add one other class, and whenever one of them is done with their study of their book, we'll set up another class, and we're already in the process of working with Jason. See what it is he would like to teach on next. We'll give you a head in advance when it will start and what it'll be. And then if you want to join Jason, so if Don's still going and Danny's gone and done, then you could choose between finishing Don or starting with Jason and whatnot. So this would be kind of the pattern we have. Hopefully we have so many for Sunday school, we can just go ahead and add a third class. And then out of that, we'll just keep going. So Hopefully we'll do biblical books, we'll do theological issues, we'll do cultural, ethical issues, practical issues from parenting, marriage, or whatever. So I'm really excited about it. I think it would be a great way to do Sunday school, especially considering where we are right now in the limitations we have. So this Sunday, first Sunday school, choose between two classes. Okay? All right, with that, let's pray. I am done talking. I'm tired of talking. Keith, will you close us in prayer?